Geopolitics and Empire is joined by Brian Fairchild, a former CIA case officer with nearly 2 decades of experience who operated in the shadows under official and non-official cover across the planet. He has testified before Congress and imparted his counterterrorism expertise to over 10,000 professionals in the FBI, CIA, military personnel, and police officers. Brian's journey also involves working directly with an Arabian ruler and serving as an advisor to Afghan national police officers during his 18-month assignment in Kabul. Drawing from his experience in the CIA, Brian authored the book The Hidden, now available for purchase, where he shed light on clandestine operations and intelligence matters. His goal is to help educate the public about the existential problems we face from China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, and what they can do about it. Welcome to the podcast, Brian.
Thank you, Hervoy. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. And, your background is interesting, fascinating, a bit of a cold warrior, maybe, so to speak. And, I grew up in the 80s and 90s on a steady diet of G.I. Joes, Chuck Norris, and Delta Force, Rambo, you name it. And so, before touching on some of these topics, anything you'd like to tell us about your background and the work you've done over the many decades?
No, actually, I can tell you, a lot of people ask me, well, how in the heck did you ever get interested in CIA? So maybe I can start there if it's okay with you. When I was I was about 13 years old, I was in Arizona, in Mesa, Arizona, dry desert, and I read, talk about the power of the word and the power of a novel. I read Jack London's Call of the Wild. And as a kid, growing up in a desert and reading about these adventures of this guy up in Alaska, it sort of captured my imagination. So that was the beginning of the journey. About a year later, I'd like for it to be sexier, but I went to the movies and I saw Sean Connery and James Bond's From Russia with Love. And man, I watched that movie and it just captured my imagination. Everything about it, got me. I mean, it was filmed in Turkey, and so there's foreigners everywhere. And they were taking the underground, passages underneath Istanbul to spy on the Russians and all that sort of thing. And of course, her boy, he got the girl. So I right at that time, I figured that's the job for me. So I started looking into it. And I'm the kind of guy that I really, once I get caught on by something, I just got to find out everything I can find out about it. So I went, at the time, there were no computers and iPhones or anything. So I went to the Boulder Public Library. I lived in Boulder, Colorado at the time. And when I went to that movie. And so I searched the entire, library, and there was nothing for 14-year-old spy wannabes. So the next thing I did was I decided, well, what else can I do? I'll write to CIA. So I wrote to CIA and I said, basically, dear CIA, I'd like to be a spy. Tell me how to do that, please. Regards, Brian Fairchild. And they wrote back. And that's really the key of what I want to say right now, is that people can inspire you in many different ways, and they don't often even know it, right? So this guy, I get a letter, and it's on my mom puts it on my pillow when I come home from school. And originally I thought, oh man, it's Mr. Fairchild, and I'm in trouble because now the CIA is writing to my father, and he's saying, hey, corral your son. We're busy, man. We can't be dealing with this sort of thing, because the only Mr. Fairchild I'd ever known was my father. Right. So I opened it up, and then I found out that when they said Mr. Fairchild, they were talking to me, and my self-esteem just shot through the roof. But it wasn't just a form letter, her boy. I mean, it was a plan, and it was written. And this is great. You can't make this stuff up. It was written by a CIA case officer by the name of Mikhail Todorovich. Now, I just seen From Russia with Love. Right. So I'm used to the accents and stuff. And here I'm getting a letter from Mikhail Todorovich, and he gives me his plan. And he says, and I want to say, when I wrote the letter, I printed it in pencil, in block letters. It wasn't a sophisticated thing. He could have easily just torn it up and thrown it away. but he answered it with a plan. And he said, well, Brian, it's great that young Americans like you are, showing an interest in the U.S. government and especially CIA. And here's what I would recommend. Stay in junior high school and go on to high school. And if it looks right for you, go on to college. And if you go to college, I would recommend that you take international politics or international relations or, you know, Asian studies, any kind of studies, a language. You pretty much need a language to work for CIA, and military is always good. And so I took that letter and I slept with it under my pillow for a long time. But I basically, in the years to come, I basically focused on that plan. I mean, it went up and down, of course. It wasn't a straight course, but whenever it got to the point where I had to make a decision, I made a decision according to the Todorovich plan. So, when I got out, when I went to the university, I had a double major. I graduated with Asian studies and international relations, and I had been a exchange student to Taiwan for a year, so I had fluency in Mandarin Chinese, and I had also become a Green Beret. And in fact, this my hat, the one I'm wearing here, I'm commemorating my unit. Here, this is the 19th Special Forces Group. And so at 25 years old, when I applied to CIA with that, having followed the Todorovich plan, they accepted me and they said, come on in, And so for the next 20 years, basically a little less than 20 years, I was a clandestine service officer for CIA. Now, back then, clandestine service officers, I mean, the CIA was really the United States premier strategic intelligence agency, and it was a global service. And if you were a case officer, you worked overseas, you lived overseas, you spoke languages, you understood the culture, you understood the religions, you understood the politics of your country and neighboring countries and how it all fit in together, because you had to, and you're undercover, right? So I was under diplomatic cover. So when you go to, parties and things, you got to at least be able to say, well, why is Kuala Lumpur named Kuala Lumpur, or that sort of thing. I mean, you got to have the ability to talk the talk. So so I went and I served in Asia, Southeast Asia, Europe. In fact, when I was in Asia, I was assigned to China. I was the chief of base in China. So I got all this great experience, and then about 1995. Now, 1991. The Soviet Union went belly up. And the Soviet Union was really the whole reason for the CIA to be created. We needed to watch the Soviets. They were a new nuclear power, just like us. They were being expansionists, and they were going everywhere around the world. And so CIA case officers had to be everywhere around the world trying to figure out what they were doing. So, I was doing that, and then I was in Tokyo Station in 1995, and by that time, CIA was already starting to go down. I mean, it was downsizing, it was closing stations and bases because it had lost its primary mission, right? So, they were getting rid of people, and I'm in Tokyo Station. I want to go stay out overseas as long as possible. All of us did. Nobody ever wanted to go back to headquarters because that was the kiss of death. I mean, if you're going to be a spy and recruiting foreign spies in other governments, you got to be overseas to recruit those foreign spies. So you don't want to come back to the United States and wander the halls of headquarters. I mean, that's not going to do anything for you. So, I'm putting in for my next assignment, and they keep saying, "Nah, just come back to headquarters." And I'm going, "No, I understand that, guys, but look, what place in the world does nobody want to go? Send me there." And they come back and say, "Nah, just come back to headquarters." And I say, "Well, look, instead of coming back to headquarters, send me to the farm, our training facility, and I'll teach other case officers at the farm." They said, "No, look, here's the deal. We're offering early out bonuses. We want you guys to leave. So we'll offer you a lot of money, and you can take the bonus and take what you've paid into retirement, and have a heck of a nest egg and go out and start some new career. We really kind of want you guys to leave, so take the money and go." Well, I kept trying, to stay overseas, and they just said no. So I said, "Okay, give me the money," and I went and started my own thing. So I went and started my own, private intelligence business for a while, and then I got an invitation from some ex-Navy SEALs who had a company down in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Went down and worked for them for a couple of years, and then when 2001 struck, I started teaching counterterrorism, and I started teaching counterterrorism at CIA and FBI, and to the military and military up in Canada, and police intelligence officers, 10,000, as you mentioned in your opening remarks. So, you know, that's pretty much what I did until 2009, and then I got an into Sheikh Saad al Sakr al Qasimi, who was at the time he was the crown prince of Ras Al Khaimah, and now he's ruler of Ras Al Khaimah. And I went over to talk to him, and I said, Your Highness, we got all these young Americans, and the only understanding of Islam or Muslims that these young Americans going over to Iraq and Afghanistan have is Osama bin Laden. And that's not the way to do it, right? I mean, we ought to have them know something about Islam and Muslims and tribes and the culture and all this sort of thing before they even land in Afghanistan or Iraq. And he said, absolutely. So I did that for a year. And then, and then came back, and I was continuing to train. And then President Obama said, to the government, he said, you guys can no longer string the words Islam and Muslim together in a sentence. And we're just not going to have it, no more of that. So since my funding was all from the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, the police departments I was teaching at, came to me and said, look, man, Brian, we love your training. I mean, it's great. We really want it, but we can't, man, because if we do that, the government's going to cut us off of all DHS funds. And we have quite a few programs from DHS. So if we take your training, we're going to get all this other stuff cut out, and we can't do it. So sorry. Well, right about that time, I got a phone call, and I got an invitation to go to Afghanistan to be a mentor in Kabul to a bunch of national police intelligence officers. So I went there for a year and a half, and I mentioned this earlier. I mean, do you know green on blue killings, Hervoye?
No,
the green on the green on blue killings were, it's a military jargon. If we're teaching our students, the green on blue killings was when the guys that we were training would turn on us and kill us, right? So while I was there from the summer of 2011 to late December 2012, and the green on blue killings began at that point and peaked at that point, and never went below that. I mean, it was like that. So it wasn't necessarily the best time to be there, and I was in close confines with my Afghan mentees. So, I went through that. That was a great experience. And then, I started, going back to do training, whatever I could. Now what I do is I basically research every day, and I've been writing articles for several years. And, now I'm doing a whole new adventure coming on programs like yours. And so far it's been great. So that's basically my background.
Yeah, so you've seen a lot. And by the way, when I finished my history degree back in 2004, I think in Illinois, I believe I did actually apply for a job at the CIA. I never got a response because I'm a dual national. I'm also a Croatian citizen, and I'm fluent in Croatian. And I actually found a job that CIA was posting where they wanted a media person to monitor the Croatian news. And I applied, and I never got a response. But that was I did Peace Corps after that, and so. But anyways, to then maybe get your thoughts, as you mentioned on your website, the problems America is facing from there are economic problems, there are domestic issues threatening the very state of things in America, foreign adversaries, right? This coming together of China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. I mean, just to highlight this, Times of Israel published yesterday an article titled Russia, China, Iran are backing Hamas online to undercut Israel and the U.S. So, we see a clear new great game, so to speak,
Yeah,
or great power conflict
yeah,
between the American,
absolutely.
between the American empire and then the East, which has already formed an alliance, and we're at a very dangerous crossroads. I think I call it a 100-year storm, whose characteristics include, financial collapse. I had on Colonel McGregor on the podcast a
Yeah,
few months back. He said America is facing what did he say? Financial Armageddon. We've got budding authoritarianism, including even in Western countries, and a third
oh,
world
sure,
war
sure.
with multiple fronts opening up of this third world war as we speak. And so, how would you sort of explain the state of the grand global chessboard, so to speak?
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a fantastic question. And I wrote a paper about this a year ago. In fact, I was sort of like the first one to coin the phrase "the new axis of evil." So a year ago, I mean, like I say, I've been an intelligence officer all my life, right? And I've served in Asia and Europe, and so I've been watching all of these developments my whole life. And I was in the Cold War, so I can recognize a Cold War when I see it, you know. So I wrote this paper a year ago, and it was titled "The New Axis of Evil: the Anti-American Military Bloc Led by China." And I sent this to everybody. I mean, all the chiefs of all the committees in Congress, and I sent it to CIA and DIA and ODNI and everybody. I mean, I sent all this out, and then I got in my Twitter account, sent it out to everybody I could think of, special congressmen and their staffs, all that sort of thing. And the problem is that I don't know. I mean, politicians tend to not want to acknowledge things, because once you acknowledge something, you've got to do something about it, right? If you name the problem, you can't just walk away, although we tend to do that a lot too. But, so everybody, even today, a lot of people in the foreign policy arena think that we're dealing with China over here and Iran over here and North Korea and Russia as separate problems, but they're not separate problems. They're all one problem. It's the new axis of evil. And they themselves say this. They describe themselves as they have bonded. They're not in an alliance in the sense of doing all the paperwork and putting the seals of governments and stuff on it. But for all intents and purposes, they are a anti-American military alliance. And so why would they do that? What's the whole deal? Well, the deal is that you know any one country, if it contests the United States, we can put up a pretty good defense. But if we're up against four, and they go through a lot of effort to split up our intelligence, our military, our political, our diplomatic attention and resources, and spread it to the four winds. Right. So, I mean, you see it, you see it happening, almost every day in the news. I mean, North Korea will sound off, fire missiles over Japan, and we'll send a couple carrier groups up there to quell the situation. All of a sudden, then Iran will do something. We'll send a whole bunch of battle groups over there. Of course, then we got the everyday problem of Ukraine, and we're drawing down our own, our own ammunition and artillery shells and all this sort of thing, plus our attention. And now our attention is getting separated, and we're having political problems within our own ranks over whether or not we should continue to do anything with Ukraine and continue to supply them with the material that they need. And of course, China looms over this whole thing. I mean, China's the number two economy. It's just it's a gargantuan monster, and nobody wants to go against China because they all trade with China, and their economies pretty much depend on it. So we've got this this new axis of evil, and to bring it back to CIA, the problem that I've got is that CIA isn't really up to the task anymore. CIA is kind of broken. So how is it broken? Well, for the whole time that the Soviet Union was there, we were doing great. We were a global strategic service. We had case officers everywhere, language capability, all that sort of thing. Focused on the Russians, the KGB, all this. And then all of a sudden, the Soviet Union went belly up. And for 10 years, For 10 years, CIA didn't have a primary mission. I mean, its primary mission was the Soviet Union. Now the Soviet Union's gone. There was a famous congressman by the name of Daniel Patrick Moynihan. And at the time, Daniel Patrick Moynihan went to James Woolsey, who was the CIA director at the time, and said, "Hey, Jim, do we even need you guys anymore? I mean, do we need a CIA? I mean, you guys won. Way to go. The Cold War, way to go. But, it's the end of history, basically. We're never going to do that again. So, why do we even need a CIA?" And the politicians at that particular point in time all felt the same way. And they wanted to benefit from the peace dividend. They wanted all the money that was going to intelligence so that they could spend it in their own constituencies, and that sort of thing. So CIA was drifting without a main mission for 10 years until all of a sudden in 2011, September 11th, boom, they got a new mission, and it was counterterrorism. But they didn't add it as one of its many missions. They basically did away with all the other missions and just focused on counterterrorism as their primary mission. And so for 20 years, they did nothing but counterterrorism. They forgot about the world. And see, bureaucratically, you have to understand when an institution does that, it's got to, everything goes that way, right? So they have to have a budget. Well, their budget wasn't for China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. It was for counterterrorism. Their congressional liaisons and the committees that they dealt with were all counterterrorism. The intelligence committees were all focused on counterterrorism. The people that they hired were all counterterrorism, qualified. They weren't going and getting guys like Brian Fairchild, writing letters when they were 14. Now they're going to, SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force and the 75th Ranger Regiment and Marine Recon. And they're taking guys and hiring them right out of the teams and putting them in CIA. So CIA didn't even create its own service. It just went and grabbed the military guys who already had the expertise, and they put them to work in the Special Activities Division and Special Activities Group. So they were doing nothing but focused on counterterrorism. And while they were doing that, the world caught up with us. And then a lot of parts of the world started passing us up. Now, a great example is China. And China, I mean, while China was expanding, while it was building its military, a lot of people understood this. I mean, I was writing papers about it. Other people were writing papers about it. But the government as an entity didn't acknowledge it until 2018, way, way late. And so during that time, you've got, China starting in 2014, starting to build its man-made islands in the South China Sea. And people, like me and other guys would write these papers and say, hey, look at what China's doing. I mean, come on, look, why aren't we doing anything about this? To the point where Admiral Davidson, who was the chief of Indo-Pacific Command at the time, he was testifying before Congress in 2018. So just 4 years later, they started the islands in 2014. Now it's 2018. And Admiral Davidson gets up before Congress and says, fellas, for all intents and purposes, China controls the South China Sea short of war with the United States. Well, that's a heck of an indictment, and the indictment is, well, CIA, where have you been? How come nobody's talking about this? How come nobody's being outraged and throwing their hands up and going, hey, there's a problem. We got to do something. They still didn't. So, as China goes along, they develop hypersonic missiles. And we don't have any hypersonic missiles. And for your audience, a hypersonic missile is not a typical missile. I mean, it can be launched from aircraft, from submarines, from land base, and it doesn't go in an arc like this so that you can shoot it down easily. It goes around things and up and down and at more than Mach 5, right? So Mach 5 is the sound, the speed of sound. And there, some of these are going at Mach 18, Mach 20, and our air defenses cannot defend against them. And they have distance. So if you're going up against China around the Taiwan area, we really can't. we're outgunned, outmanned, and out technology. So
I just wanted to add to that. By the way, you mentioned earlier SEALs, and I forgot to mention also back in the day, I was a huge fan of Dick Marchenko, the Rogue Warrior. He passed some years back. But earlier this year, I was at an event, a conference where General Robert Spalding spoke, and I briefly met him as we were walking down the hall, and Colonel Mills as well. I think John Mills, and they both spoke on this issue, China. And Spalding said that, and he was also stationed in China in the 2000 teens, and he basically said, just as you're saying now, that there's nothing we can do for Taiwan. Like, basically, the best we can do is evacuate the Taiwanese. We can't, project the power, the supply lines. Like, basically, China has the upper hand.
Yeah, I see. Here's the thing about that, Pervoye. You've got the coast of China. It just has, thousands and thousands of missiles, right? And these missiles are, give you an example of how bad it is. In 2021, the U.S. Army wrote an official paper. And in that official paper, they said, People's Liberation Army Rocket Force is the biggest and most diverse rocket force in the world. And they have so many anti-ship missiles, so just signaling out that one kind, not nuclear, and just the anti-ship missile that we would have to contend with if we were going to try to defend Taiwan. They have so many anti-ship missiles that they can hit every U.S. surface combatant in the South China Sea, to the extent that all those surface combatants have used all of their anti-missile defense capabilities and still have many left over to continue pounding those boats. So, like right now, you see, because of the Israel situation and us going head to head and worried about maybe getting into it with Iran, we've got all kinds of military assets in the Middle East because we can actually do something there. But if you notice that when China encircled Taiwan 3 different times so far, well, even more by now, our carrier battle groups stood off way, way away, because they can't get any closer. Because if they get any closer, China can sink them with hypersonic missiles before they can get in range to launch their own attacks. So this isn't conspiracy theory or anything. This is the actual fact. And so General Milley, who was up until just recently the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, well, he said 2 things. One, going back to my point about how everybody was focused on counterterrorism, including the military. All the military services are in the same boat. But he said, we have mortgaged our future to counterterrorism. That's why we're having to, rebuild and refocus the services from, counterterrorism to peer-to-peer combat, and that sort of thing. And he also said, China's got this hypersonic missile capability that we can't defend against. We don't have defenses against them. Now, we're going to build those defenses, and we're working hard, but right now China's got us. They've got the capability, and we don't have the capability. And that capability can hit Guam and can hit Okinawa and all of those places. So all the war games, Hervoye say, if we got into it with China over Taiwan, depends on who you talk to. Most of the time, the majority of people say, well, there are those war games where we don't even, we just get smeared. But there are some war games where we actually prevent China from actually taking over Taiwan, but at a price that is so dear that we couldn't, survive it. I mean, it's, they would sink most of the Japanese surface fleet. They'd sink, most of our ships in the area. They would sink 2 aircraft carriers of ours, and all the thousands of men that are on those ships, just to maybe prevent China from taking Taiwan. But then we talk about the new axis of evil. So see, here's the thing that people have to get into their heads, citizens as well as politicians, as well as military joint staff guys, is that you can't talk about going to war with China as a separate sort of thing, because there's a new axis of evil, right? So if we go to war with China, over Taiwan, what do you think Russia and North Korea and Iran are going to do? Are they going to sit back and go, oh, that's a separate thing? You guys go ahead and do your thing. I mean, no problem. We'll just watch. No,
Well,
there's a new axis of evil. They're against us. They're in agreement that they want to remove the United States as the hegemon of the world and replace the United States, and they would be in the fight too. And then after that fight, we would be so vulnerable, we wouldn't be able to expand or extend our power anywhere. We'd have to go back and lick our wounds and try to rebuild, and we don't have the ability to rebuild. Go ahead.
in that situation, what of our allies and alliance system, the whole NATO, and then, Australia, we are seeing moves sort of in preparation of what you've been discussing, US trying to establish bases and in Australia and elsewhere. But what in this situation, we've also got allies, no?
Oh yeah, sure. But the problem is that, so you've seen, Biden, he's gone over, he's trying as hard as he can to get, Japan and South Korea, to join with us and try to get our alliances, going to Vietnam and trying to drive a wedge between, the Vietnam and China. The problem is that to what extent are those folks willing to go to war with China to defend what we regard as our national vital interest, right? So polls in Japan, for instance, have shown that the Japanese population is not willing to go to war over Taiwan, and the Philippines wants us to aid them, because China is encroaching on their fishing rights and taking over their islands and all that sort of thing. And we say, yeah, we've got a treaty, a 1951 treaty with the Philippines that says that we will help defend the Philippines if there's an armed attack against the Philippine, vessel. The problem is that so far China hasn't, launched an armed attack. I mean, they blockade, they coerce, they use water cannon, but they haven't fired a shot. So as long as that doesn't happen, we're not going to go to their defense. And if we did go to their defense, it just might be a shortened way of getting into that war around Taiwan that would be so that would decimate us. So there are problems there. But yes, we got to work the alliances and really what we've got to do. I mean, there's lots of problems for Boye and but there are ways out of it. But there are no easy, simple, quick ways out of it. The ways out of it is, first of all, we have to build a strategy. And lo and behold, I mean, maybe your audience doesn't realize this, but there is no grand strategy. The United States has no grand strategy at all. Now, there are some military contingency plans. If something happens in this theater, they can pull out a file and go, well, our contingency is to do this. But as far as a grand strategy for the world and the U.S. place in it, there isn't any. So what my counsel would be to anybody who's going to become president next time around is that they've got to sit people down, both from outside the government and inside the government, the best experts they can find, and say, okay, folks, here's the deal. What are our national vital interests in the world? And I'm talking about you guys have to winnow it down. What are the basic things that we can't do without if we're going to continue as the United States of America and have a global position? So you tell me what those are. And I'm telling you right now, don't give me 15 different things. I want to know what the basic ones are. So then they come up with that. And then you go, okay, well, if those are our national vital interests, and I agree with you now. I've read the briefs and stuff. Okay, you've done a good job. Do we have the capabilities to protect and project those national interests? And if not, then what are your recommendations as to how we build up those capabilities? So it's going to take, some stepping back and not reacting like we do all the time. See, all the stuff that you see in the news right now is just reaction. When's the last time you've heard a president or a secretary of state, sit down before the country and say, my fellow Americans, here are the problems. We face these powers, and these powers are going to do this and this and this, and we only have these many capabilities, so we've got to do this, this, and this. It doesn't happen, right? There is none. So what happens is all of a sudden, North Korea sounds off, we send some stuff up there. Iran sounds off, we send stuff there. But we're all knee-jerk reactions. It's not because of a focused plan. And now we're all separated, right? And we only have limited resources. I mean, I don't know if your audience doesn't know this. This is probably blow their socks off. But the Chinese have the largest navy in the world. They have 370 surface fleet combatants. We have 296. And now we're separating those 296 all over the world. And so what happens if now, with all these forces all over the world, if China goes, okay, well, the U.S. has 48 some odd ships and 2 aircraft carriers over in the Middle East, others on the way, and they've got other stuff up in North Korea, and they got other stuff working in Ukraine, and they're split up politically. They're a polarized nation. What if I just walk over and take over Taiwan now? What will the United States do? What is the plan? How do you react? With what forces? With what budget? Where do the forces come from? Do we break off stuff from Iran and the problems in the Middle East and bring those forces to see? That's the kind of plan you need. Now, to further make this, even worse, is that CIA is just now getting back into the espionage game. So there's a big difference, Roy, between counterterrorism and espionage. Counterterrorism, you've got the skills of SEAL Team 6, Delta Force, all of those guys that CIA has brought over into their special operations. So you got that pretty much covered. But when it comes to espionage, you need language qualified people who are going to go overseas, live there for a long time, understand the nations and the countries, the regions that they're in, and get experience and recruit sources within those governments, right? That's what a spy does. That's a whole different thing. Now you have a different kind of counterintelligence threat, right? Because if you're running around doing this stuff, well, the counterintelligence services of those countries are looking for you doing that stuff. And CIA, it's getting back in the game, but it's kind of screwing up, which is why I wrote the book. I mean, my book is called The Hidden. And what that refers to, the title refers to remaining hidden below China's radar. So are we doing that now? No, because what CIA is doing is basically they have a cookie cutter approach. They've always had a cookie cutter approach where they hire guys like Brian Fairchild, who's done things that he's done and he's qualified. They put you on the treadmill and you start going through the training and you find out what CIA is and what CIA does and what the offices in CIA are and how you write for CIA and all of this stuff. And then at a certain point, they send you to the farm and you get trained in clandestine tradecraft and all of that. And then they put you overseas in official cover. But you can't work in official cover anymore because of the surveillance technology that exists today. That was great back in the old Cold War, but it doesn't work today. Let me give you just one example. There's this, you've heard of whammy, right? You've heard of wide area motion imagery. I mean, it's a silly sounding technology. It's like, people are going to go, wow, that Fairchild's crazy talking about whammy stuff. And, let's forget about that. But whammy is a real solid technology. And it's called wide area motion imagery, also called persistent surveillance and by other names. Now, we developed it, the United States government developed it back in Afghanistan in like 2011. It was secret back then. Now it's not. Now, if your listeners go to Google and Google whammy, they'll find, Fortune 500 companies that are developing this technology and selling it, not just to the United States, but to whoever wants it. So what is it? Well, whammy technology isn't a big, room-filled bunch of equipment. It's a small package. It can fit on a Cessna aircraft. And if my hand here is Washington, D.C., you get that package in a Cessna aircraft, and it's got a big cone. When they record, the cone, covers a large segment of that city. And so it just circles the city with that cone, constantly recording all movement in the city, all movement, all movement. So if you come out on your stoop to get your daily newspaper, you're recorded. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to do anything to you. They're not going to ever know about you unless you become a target. And because this is all digital, just think of consecutive digital films from your phone. You can go back and look at them anytime, right? Well, this is the same sort of thing, only, they've got big screens and you have analysts and you look at the city And like right now, if I get a report from the police that there's a murder being done at 14th and 5th Street or whatever, I as an analyst can go right there, zoom in, see the murder occurring, and then watch the perpetrators go. And wherever they go in that city, I can follow them. Not only that, but I can go back in time and I can watch when they came to murder the guy and where they came from and where they live and where they've moved and all this sort of thing. So what we do and what CIA is doing now with these new espionage officers, is we go to the embassies, and that's sticking a flag in the sand, and it's like having those big fingers at football games, going, "Here's where we are. Here's where you want to know where the spies are. Here we are, right here." Now maybe a couple guys have been separated and they're working over in a Fortune 500 company or anything, but in most places overseas, the number of American and foreign residents are relatively small. And this technology can record, hundreds of thousands of people at a time, right? So, I mean, those numbers of, well, we got 265 people working for this Fortune 500 company, and we got 225 people in the entire U.S. embassy, and so many in the consulate, this sort of thing. That coverage takes care of all that. So if Brian Fairchild comes out of the embassy, as soon as I come out of the embassy after having waved the flag saying I'm right here, that technology latches onto me and never leaves. So you can't be a case officer anymore and have official cover, because you're just guiding them to wherever your assets are. And here's the key thing to remember. I mean, so people might be saying, so what? Okay, so some spy gets caught. But that's not the deal, because in espionage, your whole point of espionage is to get secrets about that government or whatever government you're penetrating that will allow your policymakers to make correct policy to counter those threats. And an espionage officer wants to recruit a source, maybe a 25-year-old kid in the government, and run him as a spy for his entire career. But what does a counterintelligence service do if the counterintelligence service decides he's going to follow Brian Fairchild? Well, they follow him. They see he's dealing with Kalumba over in Zambia, right? So one night they knock on the door. Kalumba answers, and they say, "Hey, Kalumba, how are you? We're from the National Intelligence Agency, and we'd just like to have some talk, a little talk with you." Right there, Kalumba's scared to death, because in most countries, the National Intelligence Services are not kind and gentle. So they sit down, and Kalumba's nervous. He's, "Oh, yes, sir. Would you like some tea, sir?" This sort of thing. And the guy says, "Hey, look, Kalumba, let me just cut to the chase. Hey, this American diplomat by the name of Brian Fairchild, right?" And Kalumba goes, "Well, yes, I do, sir. Yes, a good man. I like him." And, well, Kalumba, I like him too. I've met him at diplomatic functions. He's a nice guy. He's a spy, though, right? Oh man, Kalumba's eyes get this big, and he's like, "What? Oh, no, sir, no, sir, no." And so he said, "Oh, no problem. I will never talk to him again." The National Intelligence Service guy says, "No, Kalumba, no, that's not what we want you to do. We want you to continue to see him. And as he continues to meet with you, sooner or later, he's going to pitch you as a spy. He's going to recruit you as a spy. We want you to accept. I mean, maybe drag your feet a little bit, make it look good, but we want you to accept." And then when he starts giving requirements to you about what's the prime minister thinking, what's that real policy about, what is the military really doing with China, we're going to feed you information to give to him. And it'll all be false information. And he'll give it to his people. Probably at some point, he's going to get a medal for having so much great intelligence and what a great source like you. And he's going to, the CIA will give all that great information after it's analyzed and pass it to the policymakers. And the policymakers will be making policy regarding our country, completely erroneous, terrible policy, because it won't be based on anything true. And that's why it's important that you have to have the right kind of cover. I mean, you watch TV and it's like spy versus spy, and nobody really thinks about what it's all about. But this is what it's all about. You can't recruit secret sources if everybody knows who you are and follows you and figures out who your secret sources are. So the way to overcome that, may I go into this new? Okay, the way to overcome that is, instead of this cookie cutter approach that CIA uses, one size fits all, you can't do it like that. Not anymore. So what you've got to do is you've got to basically take the approach of a sports talent scout. But what do sports talent scouts do? Well, they don't announce themselves. They don't say, "Hey, I'm a really important, scout for the NFL." They just go to football games, right? They go to football games in junior high school, guys, high school, junior college. They just go everywhere they can find talent. They pick out a couple of people in junior high school and say, "Well, I'll watch those guys a little later and see how they mature." And they look at the high school players and they go, "Man, now that guy's got an arm and he's got some brains about him too." But you've got these guys all over the country, right, looking for talent. And then at some point, they do all their work, all the tedious work, all the identifying potential assets and finding out about them, maybe even talking to the kid on the sidelines every once in a while. Never saying that he's a talent scout. Just say, "Hey, way to go, Jimmy. Hey, what were you thinking when you did that play?" That kind of thing. Then they sit around in a boardroom and they start going, "Well, I've got Jimmy." The other guy says, "Well, I've got Chad. Well, I've got this guy. I've got that. Well, which guys are the best?" "Well, we're going to choose Jimmy." And then they go to Jimmy and say, "Hey, Jimmy, how would you like to be an NFL star?" And they recruit him, right? Well, that's the way we've got to recruit American intelligence officers now. And what do those sports guys have already? They have talent. They have experience. They're on the field. They already know the job. Now they've developed their skill to a point where the NFL wants them. What a heck of an asset. So you got to find the same kind of guys overseas, same kind of Americans who live overseas, who have their businesses overseas, have the existing networks, contacts with the government, have already been looked at a number of times by the counterintelligence services, and those counterintelligence services say there's nothing there. This guy, he's not a threat. No problem. Let's move on to what the threats are. So that's kind of where we need to go because of how the world is falling apart and the new axis of evil and things. But so far CIA is still focused on the old approach, and that's kind of where we are in the world. So in the book, so the guys got to stay hidden below the radar, right? So he's in Zambia now. It's a novel, right? So not everything is factual and true, but I try to keep it as factual and true as possible through the whole story. There are going to be murders and things that are, part of the action that didn't, actually occur, but it's basically all the technology in the book is real, and all of the main aspects of the cover and operations is true. So my hero, he lives in Zambia. His name is Griff Harkin. He's out of Montana. He's been in Zambia for a while trying to sell Montana beef. And one day he's walking after having tried to sell Montana beef to the Chinese that are in Zambia. So he's got contacts with Chinese too. He's walking down the road, and in an alleyway, a woman is being raped, and he saves her life. And he gets rid of the bad guy, and it turns out that she happens to be the favorite daughter of the Chidi Mukulu. And the Chidi Mukulu is the chief of all chiefs of the Bemba tribe in Zambia. Well, that's true. That's a national fact. And so the Bemba are a huge tribe, and there's conflict between the Bemba tribe and the government. So right there, you've got the dynamic you need if you're a spy, right? Because you want to know what the Bemba know about the government, what the Bemba know about the government in China and all this sort of thing. So now you've got it already. He's already got his access to secret information without ever having to go to a government office, right? So that's how he works the deal. And like I say, the counterintelligence services look at him and go, well, he's no threat, so we don't have to worry about it. Now, if he becomes a threat for Boye, like we were talking about before, once he gets up on their radar, then he's toast, right? Because they can go back and they can follow Griff the last 6 months or however long they've got their digital stuff stored for. They can go back and find out everything he's done, every place he's been, every person he's talked to. I mean, so once you get above that radar and they've caught you, you're in bad shape. So that kind of brings it, all together. And if any of your folks are interested, you can just go to hidden chapters, freehiddenchapters.com, and read the summary, the prologue, and the first 2 chapters, which basically talks about all the stuff that we're talking about here. So, totally free. If you just want to look and see what it's about and see what this whole dynamic is. You can just go to that website and you get the free chapters. So that's kind of
Yeah,
the whole situation.
What you're discussing sort of reminds me. I spent 3 years in Kazakhstan working for Nursultan Nazarbayev, his school, and they were suspicious about me because I've got 3 passports, including a U.S. And I had actually met with some of the Kazakh security. But one of the reasons that sparked that was because I was actually warning them of a foreign intervention in Kazakhstan. So I was kind of trying to be like a good foreign national, say, hey, I don't think this is in the best interests of Kazakhstan.
Yeah, here's a warning.
But they don't know who I am. So I've got this guy. They're like, this guy's got 3 passports. What's going on? And so that was kind of, it's kind of related to what you're talking about. I'm just curious, going forward, we're just going to be seeing more and more insane amounts of surveillance. All countries, they got AI and digital surveillance and geolocation phones. I mean, you name it. Going forward, isn't it going to be very difficult to do this sort of thing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, right now, unless you do the kind of cover that I was just talking about, that specialized, sports talent scout type of recruitment of Americans overseas who already have existing networks and things, you're kind of screwed up. I mean, if you just think of the technology, and that's just one technology, the whammy technology, and that whammy technology can be put on satellites. Back in 1975, reports came out that our capabilities, and I'm not giving away secrets here. I mean, it's all public now. This is back in 1975. 1975, they said we had satellites that were so good that from space they could film the license plates on cars at CIA. Well, now you've got all these years later, with really sophisticated technology, with this whammy technology and technology that will even be better than whammy, focused on what the key government institution. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to CIA or in the area, but CIA is not a hidden by any means, or any slight, thinking. There's no way CIA is hidden. I mean, it's between Route 123 and the George Washington Parkway in Langley, Virginia. It's a forested area where it is, and the headquarters is plopped out right down. But I mean, you can walk across that whole boundary. I mean, all the way from 123 to George Washington Parkway in 10 minutes. I mean, it's not like it's a forested mountain area with secret snipers and stuff all around. It's just, in a suburban environment. Worse, they've got big signs that say CIA right here, just like the embassies, you want to know where the spies are? We're right here. And so, I mean, the concept that you can have cover if you've gone into CIA headquarters or any of the, the national intelligence agencies or any of the satellite properties that they have, and that you still have cover boggles me, right? The CIA is never going to say that, right? Because CIA is a huge institution and it's got a lot of property. I mean, the headquarters itself is huge. They have 2 headquarters buildings. And they've got satellite property all around Northern Virginia and in Washington, D.C. And basically, what they would have to say if they agreed with my points, they would have to say, yeah, Fairchild's kind of right. But, we're obsolete. And no government institution known to anyone is ever going to look at, their boss and say, I'm obsolete, right? Well, I'm catching up. I'm obsolete, but I'm catching up, because they don't need all that pride. If you're looking for, when they go out and get talent for the SEAL Team 6 or Delta Force, they're not bringing people in, 25 somethings, and going through all that. They go to the existing forces and the existing SEAL teams and special forces groups and, Ranger, battalions and Marine recon, and they find the people who already have the talent, right? They're looking for the diamond in the rough. They're looking for a guy that can already do the job. And boy, this guy does it in stellar fashion. We want him on 6. We want him in Delta. That's how they do it. But CIA doesn't do that. CIA goes, okay, everybody apply. Okay, we're going to take you. We're going to take you. We're going to take you. Put you on the cookie cutter. Put you over an official cover, and it's going to take you 7 years. That's what we normally thought back when I was in, to become a seasoned intelligence officer. One that isn't really learning and has been there and done that, wears a T-shirt, and now you can actually make a contribution. But you can't do that anymore. You need people that can hit the ground and already have the capabilities, already have the networks. So you got to do this new thing, and and CIA is not doing it. So so we're in a world of hurt, and these enemies aren't going to go away. They're getting bolder and bolder. I mean, if you just look at the reports about how China and Russia are intercepting our aircraft in airspace that is free to everybody, but China claims, and they're not going to go away. They're going to continue to do that until either we go away or there's an incident and we go to war. So you got to have an intelligence service that actually can warn the policymakers and tell them how things are shifting and where we have to focus. And right now, we just don't have it.
Yeah, I guess my last question then would be: do you see any inkling or sign from anywhere of anyone trying to attempt you make a step towards this, or not really at all?
Well, no, because CIA got kind of caught by this whole thing, right? So I mean, it was counterterrorism all the way, and then all of a sudden China took over the South China Sea, and then they circled Taiwan, and still CIA wasn't doing anything with China. And the new director, Burns, he went to his hearings in Congress and said, "Oh man." They asked him right away, "What are you going to do about China?" "Oh, China's on top of our priority. We're going to put resources and people and money and get language qualified officers." And then he went and became director. A year later, he said, "Oh, I'll show you how we're doing this. We've created a new China center in the clandestine service." That shows you that we're really focused on it. But then a year after that, the deputy director had to go to the counterterrorism center. And because CIA was focused on counterterrorism for 20 years, the counterterrorism center is the locus of power in the clandestine service. They are the big honcho. They're the guys, right? So the deputy director had to go to them and say, "Look, you guys, we're not just talking about this stuff. We really need to do this. This is what's happening in the world. China's not going away. We actually have to take resources away from you guys and put them on China. We really have to do this." That was about a year ago. I wrote a paper and documented it. And from that point, I haven't seen that anything has really moved forward, other than Burns once said, "We're making inroads again into China." And China came out to humiliate him and said, "Oh, yeah, we caught this spy, and this spy." And where were they recruited? Well, Tokyo Station recruited this guy. The Italian station recruited this guy. Official cover. Right, the thing that I've been talking about. You can't do that anymore. And so I was just listening to a report by the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency director, Barrier, and he said it wasn't. In 2018, the National Security Strategy said counterterrorism is no longer the problem. China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, that's the problem. That's what we got to focus. 2018. Wasn't until 2020, he said, that they really started, turning around, trying to get into the strategic thing. And, governments act slowly, man. I mean, that's only, 3 years ago. And in 3 years, you can't just snap your fingers and go, let's have a really successful China program. They're still trying to figure out how to do that, where they need to go, what they need to do, what skills they need, and so is CIA. They're trying to figure it out too. We've just done it too late. Now, sooner or later, we'll probably catch up and we'll start giving them a go. Right now, not happening.
Well, yeah, and by the time we catch up, there's a new threat. No, I'm just kidding. I think the threat that we're looking at right now, this is going to be going forward.
Oh, absolutely.
The big issue. So we've covered a lot. Your book is The Hidden, a Griff Harkin novel. Anywhere books are sold, it's available. And is your best website, point of contact, brianfairchildbooks.com?
Yeah, that's it. And if they go to that site, the freehiddenchapters.com, it takes them right to the website, but to my section of the website that has those free chapters. So either way, they can get to it.
And I think in a few months, if people follow my socials, you will be joining me on my live TNT radio program, and there people
Be
can
my pleasure.
yeah, and people can call in and even ask you a question on that. And so, yeah, I highly recommend the book, The Hidden. The links are in the description, brianfairchildbooks.com. And thank you for being with us on Geopolitics and Empire.
It's been my pleasure. It's been an honor meeting you and speaking with you. So thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast. The website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and I encourage you to sign up for the free email list that goes out with each podcast and every weekend with a collection of news headlines. The newsletter and website are our last lines of defense. We're being censored and deplatformed. It's nearly impossible to find Geopolitics and Empire on the Google search engine. We've been blacklisted. YouTube frequently takes down our videos with strikes. Facebook restricts our page. Reddit and Twitter take down posts. And after the Associated Press mentioned Geopolitics and Empire in a 2021 article co-written with NATO, our Patreon account was terminated. Vimeo also terminated our Pro account. The best free way to help Geopolitics and Empire is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or elsewhere and subscribe to all of our media channels. You can find the video broadcast now on 5 platforms: Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, BitChute, and Brighteon. You can find the audio broadcast on the podcast ecosystem: SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, and so on. My current favorite social media channels are Twitter and Telegram, but you can also find us on Gab, MeWe, Minds, Float, VK, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Finally, Geopolitics and Empire is in dire need of funding to continue. You can leave a donation, purchase a consultation with the host, or become a member to receive additional benefits. We also produce a weekly broadcast called Dissident Thinker for members and Rockfin subscribers only. We will continue to fight the good fight come hell or high water. Thank you for listening.